Hello everyone. So the request was made at the end of the class to create a lens flare that was generating the smoke trail that we worked on in class. So to do this, I am going to create a composition from the start so that we have a refresher on what we did during the exercise, and then I'll go ahead and add the lens flare towards the end. So to do to catch up with what we did in class, I am going to create a new composition, and this will be the composition that contains all of my elements, and that will be my main composition. Same settings as what we worked in class, 1280 by 720, 30 FPS, and anything above 5 seconds on the length of the composition works. So I'll click OK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new solid, and this solid I will be calling particles, because that's where I'm going to be creating my particle. I'll make it comp size, and then I'll make it black as well. Click OK. Actually, the color really doesn't matter, because the effect that we're about to apply, which is fractal noise, will remove all color from the layer. So I'll go ahead, and the fractal noise is the filter that we worked on in class last time, the one that we used to create the fire, that we used to create the water, that we used to create the smoke. So I'm going to change the fractal noise type from basic to dynamic, and then from linear to spline. I'm also going to decrease the contrast to about 60%, and I'm going to increase the brightness to about 30, so that we get kind of like this puffy looking cloud looking texture. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a couple of keyframes for evolution, one at the very beginning with a value of 0, and around 8 seconds I'm going to create another one with a value of 2 revolutions. And so that's going to give me that motion inside that, if we scrub fast, looks like lava, but if I go slow, it almost looks like the smoke is morphing, like this puff smoke coming from steam or something like that. With this done, that's all I need for this particular layer. And so since this was an effect that was applied to the solid, it will not, the next effect that I will be applying will not recognize the black and white information from the solid. It will actually only recognize the color of the solid that I created, which is black. And so I need to pre-compose this to bring everything into and sort of pancake the filter along with the particle, and so that it does recognize the black and white information that we are creating through the filter. So I am going to pre-compose this, and I'm going to call it particles comp. That's fine, particles comp 1, and I'm going to move all the attributes to bring that information into that new composition, and as you can see, it has been replaced. If I scrub, information still there, but we don't need to see this anymore, because we only need the information, the black and white information, so we don't really need the visibility of it. So I'm going to turn off the layer. We do need the layer, but we don't need to see it. Then I am going to create a new composition in here, and a new solid, sorry. And this solid, I am going to call it smoke, and I'm going to make it the same size as the comp, make it black as well. Click OK. And it is to this solid that I will be applying the particle whirl. So I'll start typing particle whirl into my filters, and there it is, CC particle whirl. And from this, I am going to be, as you notice, if I scrub 2 seconds, I see the sparks coming, and that's our particles. Those are the ones we need to change. First things first, let me turn off the grid under the grid and guides. I don't want to get that grid on the way. And then I am going to go down to the bottom, and I'm going to start working my way up. So I'm going to change the particle type from line to texture faded disk. And then to that, I am going to change the texture right underneath particle type from texture layer, from none to particle comp. And you'll see that I see the little puffy smoke that is yellow and red. I am also going to change the breath size to about 0.75, and I'm going to change the depth value to about 2. And then I'm going to change the color for the breath to white, and the depth color to white as well. And if I scroll, I can see that it's almost like smoke popcorn being shot from that producer and falling down per the gravity that the filter comes with. So I'm going to change those settings next. I'm going to go to the collapse the particle, and uncollapse the physics. I want to change the gravity from 0.5 to 0, so that there's no gravity. And if I scrub, you'll see that all the smoke is coming off the center. And the reason for that is because I have a very high velocity as how the particles are being shot from the center. So I'm going to change that velocity from 1 to 0.015, let's say. And so I end up with a ball of smoke in the center of the screen. Now you can play with these values to modify to get to what you're applying this in whatever project you're applying this. And so the beautiful thing about this is that these are all if you change them, including what we did in the particles comp, it will be procedural. So that means that if you make a change in a pre-comp, all of the other pre-comps using that specific information will change accordingly. So with this done, let's go ahead and do a quick test to see if the smoke is actually leaving a trail as we expected. For that, we're going to be changing the producer values. And so I'm going to change the X position, and I'm going to move that producer to the left side, and that's about a value of -0.5. So about -50% of the width of the screen. And that is actually how this particular filter works. It's actually measuring the percentages of depending on the size of the width of the screen. And so in this case, -0.5 is actually -50% on this side. This will be +50%. Down to the bottom would be about 0.28% of the width of the screen. And Z position, we don't change anything because Z is 0, and everything we create in 2.5D has a value of 0 when it starts on the Z axis. So with that in mind, I'm going to create a keyframe for the Z position at 0, and then I'm going to go down to about 2 seconds, and remember that these values are based on the width of the screen, like I said a second ago. So if I increase this to about 5, that means I have 5 times whatever the width of my composition was, which is 1280. So you are now, that thing is now about 6,000 pixels into space. And if I scrub, I can see that I'm in fact creating a trail of smoke behind my generator, behind my producer. The only problem is that my smoke is short-lived, and that is because of the longevity that I have given to the particles. So if I change my longevity from 1 to about 8 seconds, they're going to live for that long, and they're going to keep on increasing in size, and then when I get to about 8 seconds, they start disappearing, and that works just fine. So I am in fact creating that smoke trail. Now this works fine and dandy, and you can actually control that generator through these values, but you are basically constrained by using only these values. For something like this, what I usually do is I create a null object, and I control the producer through the null object. So to do that, I'm going to create a null object, and this null object, I am going to make it a 3D layer, and I am going to call its position values. Then I am going to attach each one of these position values to the position of the null object. And to do that, we're going to type a bit of code. So first things first, let me go ahead and press the Alt key, bring my time marker to the beginning of the composition. Then I'm going to press the Alt key and click on the stopwatch. Now that brings up that settings scripting window, and I can go ahead and start typing what I need to script. So for this, I am going to attach my null object, everything, all of the variables of the null object into that one variable. To do that, I'll simply name the variable. In this case, it's my target, so I'm going to call it T for target, and I am going to say equals, and then I'll use the pick whip to pick that null object. So anything that is the null object will be assigned to that T value. With that T value, I can now go ahead and start picking the different settings that make up whatever the value, whatever null object is. So things like position, rotation, and all that. I'll close that sentence with a semicolon and hit return. And then I'm going to say capital T, which is what I just created, position, and for this, since this is the x-axis, I am going to use the value of 0 for this, because remember, on 3D the values for position are 0, 1, and 2, which correspond to x, y, and z. So I'll go ahead and type position, and then I'm going to say open bracket 0, and that is the position that I'm going to be picking. Now that I am going to, from this, I am going to subtract half of the width, because that's, if you recall, we were looking at the half of the screen, so half of the width of my composition. So it'll be this comp dot width divided by 2. I am going to wrap those two things in a parentheses, and then since the relative distance to everything is based on the complete width of the composition, I am going to divide that value by this comp width. That should give me the percentage that I'm looking for, where if the null object is on this side, it will be giving me negative values between 0 and 0.5, and on this side between 0 and 0.5 on the positive. So negative on this side, positive on this side, and that's based on the equation because we are comparing the position of the null object to the center of the world, and then we're dividing it so that we get that percentage. And if I click here and I scrub, you'll see that my smoke has moved from the corner to the center of the screen. Remember, the center of the screen, that my null object's origin point is right here on the upper left-hand corner. So that aligns really well. So I see that this is in fact working. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that code. I'm going to select it, drag a selection to select it, copy it, and then I'm going to use the exact same code for the position, except I am going to be changing the position because for the x-axis it is 0. I'm going to change that position to 1, which is the value for the y-axis. And instead of checking the width for the percentage, I am going to be using the height for the percentage. However, the width for where I divide by width because that is the actual value that it's through which we're measuring everything on the screen, as I said earlier. So if I click on that, you'll notice that if I click on the gray area, you'll notice that my smoke is actually in fact coming from the 000 point of my not 000 point, from the anchor point of my null object, from the origin of my null object. So with that in mind, I'm going to go back to the beginning, place my time marker at 0, and I am going to turn off the keyframes for my z-axis. Then I'm just going ahead and press Alt and click again on the position Z for that producer, and I'm going to paste these values. And since like I said earlier, since anything I place on 2.5D that I want to turn into a 3D object lands on the 0 value for position, there is no width or height by which this needs to be calculated. The value is directly related to the width of the composition, and so the position will change from 0 to 2 in this case, which is z-axis. So it will read t position 2 divided by this comp's width. Those are directly related, the position z and the width. And so with that, let me click on the gray area, and when I scrub, I can see that my smoke is still there. Now I'm going to place that null object in the corner down here and do the exact same test and see if this responds the way it did before. So I'm going to click as keyframe at the very beginning with a value of 0 for x, 720 for y, and 0 for z. And then I'm going to scrub down to about 2 seconds, same test that I did before for the other one. And in this case, I am going to change this to about 15,000. And you'll notice that in fact, I do have a trail of smoke that is being generated. Now, the advantage of placing this, the control of that filter to the null object, is that now I have all of the abilities that a layer has to be able to control the settings, the transformations of that specific layer. What does that mean? Well, for example, I now have, where before I had to rely on those 6 variables that came with the producer for the filter, I now have the ability to attach to the null object. I can go ahead and attach any motion path. And I actually, as a matter of fact, I can go ahead and change the path of the object as I see fit by using Bezier handles if I want to. So let me go ahead and make this curve like this, and then as I scrub, you'll notice that the smoke follows that curvature. So it makes it a lot easier for me to control things such as the motion path of different objects. With that done, let me undo that really quick. Let me go ahead and attach the lens flare to the tip of the smoke. Now remember, to do this, what we want to double check that this is in fact 3D. So to make sure that this is 3D, I'm going to create a camera, and I'm going to create a 1-node camera, 35mm, same settings that we worked on in class. And as I scrub, let me go ahead and place a keyframe for position for the camera, and let me go ahead and push this on the z-axis, and you'll notice that I am in fact chasing the trail of the smoke. So it is in fact a 3D trail. So let me undo that really quick, and let me undo again. I want to maintain the camera, but I don't want to have any keyframes just yet. So with this done, what I want to do now is create the lens flare to follow that null object as well. So I'm going to create a new solid, and this solid I'm going to call flare, and make it comp size, and click OK. Now as I'm doing this, I'm going to go to my effects and presets, and I'm going to tell you that lens flare is a 2D filter, just like it is in Photoshop, and it allows me to control the position of a lens flare on the screen along with the brightness. So what we're going to try to do here is we're going to try to turn a 2D positioning value from a filter into a 3D positioning of a null object. To do so, we need to write a bit of code. So let me go ahead and start with the lens flare center. I'm going to press the Alt key and click on the stopwatch, and I am going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to attach my null object to a variable I call t, and now t contains everything that's the null object, semicolon, and now what I want to do is I want to start typing the code that is going to allow me to capture those objects. So the objective here really is to, right now, the values, the 2D values are based on that layer, on the layer that I have created. So that layer has basically control as to where the positioning of this is, how it displays within the screen. Now, what we want to do is we want to change that value to be not dependent on the layer, but depending on the camera position, whatever camera I have, whether I have a new camera that I created or the default camera. And to do that, we basically need to convert the code really quick. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to, let me actually move this out of the way. I apologize. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the code here, and we're going to grab the value, sorry, of L, in this case T, sorry, and I'm going to say T, and I'm going to use this value to comp, and in there I am going to dump my coordinates for the world. And since my world's coordinates start at 0, 0, 0, that's as good point as any to start. And so that becomes the XYZ of that T. Now it's attached to the lens flare. So it's no longer looking at the X and Y values of my solid, but at the X, Y, Z values of my composition. And so it follows the trail, the smoke trail. Now let me go ahead and turn the mode for that particular layer from normal to screen, and you'll notice that basically it is following that smoke trail, it's creating the smoke trail. With that done, what I'm going to do now is I am going to work on the scaling value for the lens flare. So because as you notice it's constant, it almost doesn't look like it's actually being pushed away. So I need to make it dim as it goes away. And to do that, we're going to be working with the flare brightness. So to do this, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and start working on code for the flare brightness. So let me press the Alt key and click on the lens flare. And I am going to do the following. I am going to create a variable called F, and that is the factor, the amount of brightness that I'm going to use. And I'm going to make that 100%. That is the maximum value that I want the lens flare to be based on the equation that I'm about to create. Then I want to create the distance between the null object and the camera one to determine what the brightness of that lens flare is. And so if they are, as they are currently, this is 100% of the brightness of my lens flare. That is what they would look like at the maximum value. And that's exactly what I want. So I want to go ahead and create a variable called C, and that's for camera, and that would be anything that is my camera. So let me make that a child. Connected here with the pick whip. Then I'm going to press semicolon, return, and then I'm going to create one for the null object. So n equals anything that is the null object. Now, the thing that I want to check is the length of the distance between these two things. So I'm going to say distance 1, which is what I'm trying to start measuring. The distance 1, D1. And by the way, they can also be lowercase. So I'm going to use lowercase for this one so you can see that it works the same. I'm going to be using something that's a piece of code that is called length. And I'm going to be actually length parentheses. And I'm going to, inside the parentheses, I'm going to say C, capital C, which is what I use for the variable up here, dot position, comma, then capital N, which is the null object's position, dot position. All right. And that assigns basically the distance. That gives me the distance between whatever the camera is and the null object is. Then I want to capture what the distance is at the very beginning when this thing starts. And for that, I'm going to use a variable called D2. And I'm going to say same thing, length. Same thing as before, length with the parentheses. And in this case, I'm going to use C position dot value at time, and then the value at time I want to use is 0, and then comma, and then the same thing for n dot position, and this is capturing what the value of the position of that particular object, whether it was the camera or the null object, the camera or the null object was at the very beginning. Now we're going to do an equation to calculate the distance, and based on that distance, create a percentage value that's going to increase or decrease the brightness of my lens flare. And that equation reads like this: D2 divided by D1 times F, which is my factor up here, capital F, the value that I'm going to be using for the lens flare. And when I do that right now, this works, no errors, and I see that there's no change on my lens flare. But as my lens flare pulls away, it starts getting dim. And if I move my camera in space to try to capture, the lens flare starts increasing in brightness. And that's exactly what I want. So that's what the code looks like for that. I'll let it be for a second so you can stop the video so you can actually type this, mind the syntax. And with this done, then what I did in class after the whole thing is I created a simple, let me collapse all my layers, and I added a 3D layer in the background, the Chicago image. Then I made it 3D. So let me go back to my switches, make it 3D. Then I went ahead and pushed it in 3D space to about 100,000 pixels. Let me make it 50,000 pixels this time. And then I went ahead and increased its size to cover the entirety of the composition to create the parallax feel as I move my camera. So let me go ahead and click a position keyframe for my Z-axis on my camera. And then I'm going to go to about 4 seconds and try to chase that smoke and see if this is actually doing what it's supposed to. Let me go ahead and move my null object out to 2 seconds as well. Perhaps even move it further. Let me make it 30,000 pixels for that. And you'll notice now that my camera chases the smoke trail and the lens flare is getting dim as it goes far away. Let me do a quick preview of this. Let me actually increase the size of this to full screen so we can actually see this full effect. I think that works really well. I hope this answers the question.